Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to the 31st meeting of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee. We have apologies from Katie Clark this morning, and we're joined by Marie McNair MSP and Colette Stevenson, our convener, online this morning. We move to agenda item 1, declaration of interest. And moving to this item, can I welcome Gordon MacDonald back to the committee? I understand Mr MacDonald, who replaces Kevin Stewart. I thank Kevin for his valued contribution to the committee for the time he was on it. And Gordon, as a new member of the committee, do you have any relevant interest to declare?
Probably the only thing worth mentioning is that my wife is a local authority councillor with West Lothian Council.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. That is now on the record. We move to agenda item 2, which is decision on taking business in private. So our next item is to ask for the approval of members to take agenda item 7 in private. Can I check? Is that agenda item 8? Hala? No, it's 7. Can I just check we'll get the numbering right on that?
Yes, 8.
Is it definitely 8? Right, agenda item 8 in private. Thank you. Is that agreed, everyone? Yes. Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 3. So our next agenda item is the first evidence session on post-legislative scrutiny of the Child Poverty Scotland Act 2017. The committee has already done some scrutiny work around child poverty with inquiries into the impact of the Scottish Child Payment and efforts to increase earnings from parental employment. The inquiry adds to that work by considering the impact of having a legislative framework in the Act underpinning policies. Today we are going to hear from a panel focusing on the impact of the Act on local policy and delivery. And I welcome our witnesses who are attending remotely, that being Evan Beswick, Chief Officer, Argyll and Bute Health and Social Care Partnership, Sally Buchanan, Library Services and Fairer Falkirk Manager, Falkirk Council, Martin Booth, Executive Director of Finance, Glasgow City Council, and Peter Kelly, Chief Executive, the Poverty Alliance. Thank you all 4 of you for joining us this morning. Your support is appreciated. I would also like to note we've received apologies from Charlotte Cuddihy at NHS Lothian, who's unfortunately unable to attend this morning. And a few points, few housekeeping rules before we start the formal evidence session. For those giving evidence, I ask you to wait until myself or a member asking the question says your name before speaking. Please allow our broadcasting colleagues a few seconds to turn on your microphone before you speak, as a small pause is desirable. And can you indicate in your chat box in Zoom an R if you wish to come in? Be slightly patient because the clerks will pass me that information. I won't see the chat box myself. Can I ask everyone, and I include myself in that, to keep questions and answers concise as much as possible. And we'll now move to questioning. And question 1, Colette Stevenson, our convener.
A very good morning to you, and my apologies for not being able to attend in person. And I want to touch upon reporting requirements. And can I thank each of you for your submissions that you've put forward as well. You know, it's been touched upon by each of the submissions that it's quite labour intensive in terms of the reporting requirements, and it's been an added burden, if you like. So can I just ask to what extent have you been able to integrate reporting under the Act and with other statutory reporting requirements as well? And I think I'll put that forward to Martin Booth first of all. Thank you.
Good morning, panel, and thank you for that question, Ms Stevenson. The reporting requirements for anything that we do in local government are fairly onerous. I think this one's slightly different. It is certainly in our position, it's different reporting, but the fact that we're working jointly with the Health Board to produce this report means that it does come from a kind of different place. I think the need to produce an annual report is quite a good discipline for us, and make sure that we're keeping our elected members well briefed, and that we are working together. It also helps with the focus on this as a key priority. But yeah, it doesn't particularly tie in with any of the other reporting, but probably it's more from the Health and Social Care Partnership where that reporting would be duplicated rather than from the council side of it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I don't know whether Sally would like to come in on that.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for that. Happy to come in and answer that question from the perspective of Falkirk Council. We have taken steps this year to align the child poverty reporting requirements with those of our anti-poverty strategy, which forms part of the reporting of our local outcomes and improvement plan under community planning. So this is the first year we have got to this stage. We earlier this year got approval for a new strategy that is an anti-poverty strategy with a focus on targeting child poverty, and that will be our child poverty action plan going forward. So we will report back on an annual basis on that wider strategy, but with a specific section and focus on what we are doing around child poverty. We're hopeful that this will streamline our reporting a bit, because there is a lot of time on reporting. An annual reporting cycle comes around quite quickly, especially with the timescales for getting it into council committees and then community planning boards for approval. So, we want to make sure that we are leaving time in there for delivery of action and not just reporting. But I'm hopeful that going forward, we will have got a better balance.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Sally. And I see that Peter wants to come in, so yeah. You were on my radar anyway, Peter, so I welcome your comments.
Thanks very much, Convener. I think just to follow up on Martin's point, I think there is a question about it being a good discipline to do annual reporting to make sure that child poverty in general stays high up the agenda of local authorities and health boards. So that good discipline is important. I think there is undoubtedly a balance to be had between reporting and doing, and certainly a lot of the feedback that we've had, in our role as one of the national partners, is that sometimes that balance perhaps doesn't feel quite right, and that there's a real strong emphasis on reporting, when I think most of all colleagues in local authorities and health boards want to get on and make sure that we're delivering. So I think it's good to reflect on that balance. But I think what's also partly at issue, and Sally's already highlighted it, is the scope for ensuring that there is streamlining of all of these important responsibilities and making sure that they're given due regard. But I think where there are responsibilities, for instance, to report on employability or on child well-being, that there are opportunities to see where these can be better coordinated. I think, though, just finally, one thing that is an issue is the resources available to do the coordination, to do the planning. And I think COSLA mentioned it in their input to the committee. The initial, I think, £5,000 that was given to local authorities to support the production of local child poverty action reports, and there's been no other dedicated resource. I know budgets are constrained across the public sector, but I think if we want to spend the time, which is important time, on meaningfully planning and reporting on what we're doing around child poverty, that needs to be given consideration. Resources required to do that need to be given consideration.
Yeah, thanks very much, Peter. I see that Evan would like to come in as well.
Thank you, Convener. I suppose just to add to the kind of really sensible comments from other contributors, but the one addition from an Argyll and Bute perspective is the small authority and remote and rural component of reporting. And I make this comment generally. in that every reporting requirement has a disproportionate impact on a small local authority. You know, we're less than 100,000 population spread across a huge landmass and 23 inhabited islands. So for every reporting requirement we have to do the same reports as a larger local authority, but within fewer resources and particularly fewer workforce resources that we have. You know, recruitment and is a challenge for all local authorities, but particularly rural ones. So anything that can be done to streamline the reporting requirement to kind of make that a bit more parsimonious would be really helpful to us and enable us to focus on the work of doing the poverty reduction.
Okay. Thank you very much, Evan. I don't know if anyone else would like to come in. If not, I'll pass back to Bob, our convener. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Liz Smith.
Thank you, and good morning to the panel. I want to base my questions around a comment that is, I think, very important within the recent Joseph Rowntree report from September in this year. Very, very supportive of the Scottish Government's child payment, and we know that there has been excellent feedback from families who are in receipt of that. They did, however, criticise both the UK and the Scottish governments about the data, saying that it was extremely difficult to actually measure the impact of the policy on the actual outcomes. And I'm just wondering, when it comes to yourselves in trying to implement and make a reduction in poverty, how easy is it for you to capture what you think is the most meaningful data in terms of measuring just how successful you are being in reducing poverty? Could I come to Mr. Kelly first?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I guess other colleagues will have that sort of direct experience of how they're using data locally to address child poverty. I think what we've seen through the process, so taking a sort of step removed as we are, but I think what we've seen throughout the process since the Act was passed was a greater focus on data and on the development and the collection of local data. What that perhaps hasn't, so there is a good focus, and I think local authorities, and you see this right throughout the local child poverty action reports, whatever form they come in, there's really a strong attention to the data and to understanding what data is available. But what that I think serves to do, and I'm sure colleagues would reflect on this, is that it highlights where the data is lacking and where there is still gaps in the data, and often that's really out with the control of local authorities or health boards to address. These are often, excuse me, large national data sets that they have very little control over. So labour force survey, for example, we know that in-work poverty is a key dimension of the picture of child poverty. But getting good data on local labour market statistics, and particularly on pay and whether we're affecting that, is really challenging. And I think what we've seen is local authorities and health boards making the best of what they can with data. So I would point to the Dundee Fairness Report, I think it's called, Fairness Action Plan, which I think has a really useful scorecard approach, linking the targets that they've set in their fairness plan and with using the data that is available to track over longer periods of time since the plan was initially set, and then going to current years and then looking at future projections. So they're using it as best they can, but I think there's undoubtedly a question. You raised the point about Scottish child payment, and that's absolutely critical, I think, for the national picture. We need to get that right, and yes, Scottish Government and UK Government need to work better to get that sorted.
Could I just push you just a little further, Mr. Kelly, on this question, because it is extremely important, namely, how easy is it for you to identify where the gaps are in the national data in order to be able to improve the measurability of your policy commitments? I mean, you mentioned about employment. You'd like to see better data there. Are there any other aspects where you think that better data could help identify just how successful we're being in different areas?
So I think the question is about as I've said, the ability to use data at the local level that's gathered at a national level. And I think your question is how difficult is it? It's very difficult, and there are significant gaps. And I think around the local measurement of child poverty, we're using proxies for the income data. And we would prefer to have income data, but I think the balance between the resources that would be required to gather that data, and should say I'm not a researcher, I'm not a data expert, but the resources required to gather that kind of level of data at local level, and particularly, as Evan has said, for smaller local authorities, where that data collection is really never going to be a responsibility, I think, then that's a real challenge. Yeah.
I was actually going to ask Mr Bezic if he has any further comments, because it must be very difficult in Argyll and Bute to come up with all the collection of the relevant data. Is it a particular problem in rural communities?
It absolutely is. Thank you for the question. And I preface this by a quick comment that I am no data expert. But one of the challenges we have is a lot of our data sets don't cover the small pockets of population that we have. They're just not refined enough to do that. And as you say, to do that at a local level requires significant resources. But we have actually, through the work that's been driven by this Act, we've been able to invest money from using the Child Poverty Practice Accelerator Fund into doing some very technical and specific data work, buying in data sets from other organisations that have allowed us to much more closely refine our work and our targeting to where it's most needed. And that is resource intensive, but it's been very valuable for us to be able to do that.
I think that's interesting, and I think we'll come on to the aspect of collaboration between different local authorities, which is obviously important to try to cover up some of these gaps. Could I just ask my final question about how easy... Sorry. Oh, sorry.
It's just because Sally Buchanan and Martin Booth wanted to...
Sorry. Yeah, of course.
Sally, don't you go first? Sorry, let's go.
Thank you for that. I think in terms of data, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about data, we've spent a lot of time gathering data, and we've made some really good progress with that. I think that's been very helpful for making sure that tackling child poverty is getting the attention that it requires, both within Council and within our NHS colleagues. We did some work in partnership with the NHS a few years ago, looking at data that resulted in a diagram and showed just all the different referral pathways that exist. That actually was really important for getting this really on the agenda throughout our organisations and has made quite a difference. But I think I want to add a caution to that. I think that there is a real risk of going down a rabbit hole with data. You can spend a lot of time gathering an awful lot of data, and at the end of the day go, so what are we actually going to do differently now that we've got all this data? Does it actually tell us anything that we didn't know at the start of all of this? I think in Falkirk we're making really good inroads now into how we actually use some of our local data to make sure we're targeting our services appropriately, to match up different data sets and identify people who are missing out on benefits. So some real kind of like at a ground level useful things with the data, with our local data, which actually is taking us forward and looking at small changes, incremental bits, small numbers of people, but they're actually getting money that they were missing out on before. I think that's all absolutely the right stuff that we should be doing. And I guess I think we've done a lot of work on data. I think we need to be cautious about how much more we continue to put more and more resources into looking at data without necessarily always having the clarity of the purpose of what are we going to do at the end of that. So I think we absolutely need to be making use of the data that we've got, but I'm cautious about how much more data collection we invest in.
Martin Booth wanted to come in as well. Yeah. Martin.
Hi, thank you, Ms Smith. I think I'd come with a slightly different viewpoint. When I was asked to take responsibility for the child poverty targets in Glasgow, a councillor asked me about, and this was about the time when the Scottish Child Payment was first coming in, and I was asked about would that make a significant difference, and if they doubled it, would that eradicate child poverty in Glasgow? And the honest answer was we didn't know, because we had an idea of the number of children living in poverty, but we had no idea of the depth of that poverty. So we undertook some research, which we first published in February 2020, so timing's everything, immediately before lockdown started. And we've repeated that data exercise every year since, with the most recent data being in the summer of this year. So we've got a really good understanding of the levels of poverty, the areas, the kind of family makeup where they're more likely to be in poverty. Now, we maybe thought we knew that, but we now definitely do know it. Our data is not 100% accurate because it's based on the data that we can access. So a lot of it's based on council tax and housing benefit data, but we've actually had a really positive relationship with the Department of Work and Pensions. It has been more challenging with the Scottish Social Security Agency, because we believe that the Scottish Child Payment is significantly underclaimed in Glasgow. But there's issues with them sharing data with us. DWP are very good at sharing data, but a lot of it we're allowed to use the data for research purposes, but we're not allowed to target. So we know families that are in difficulty, but we can't legally use that data to access those families. So I think the data is really important. It's allowed us to do a lot of targeting within individual wards. We know the wards with the deepest levels of poverty. We also know the wards with the most children that are on the verge of poverty. So early intervention, if we can stop families falling into crisis, that can make a big difference. So having the data is really important. Be able to use that data and having a wider data set and access to all the data would be really, really helpful. And being able to use that data to actually target families that need help, rather than a kind of much more wildfire approach. So, yeah, the data has made a massive difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Booth. That's extremely helpful comments. Just on that, to finish off my question, do you think that in order to tackle child poverty, there are policies that are likely to be most successful in that respect if it's tackling the general aspect of poverty? Because implicit in what you've just told the committee is that it's really about helping families to get out of poverty, which by definition helps children. And I just wonder if your data that you have collected recently is showing that the policies to tackle the overall level of poverty are probably the best at tackling the child poverty, on top obviously of having the child payment. Mr Booth.
So I was just waiting to be unmuted, sorry, thanks. That's quite a difficult question because it's such a complex situation, but yes, clearly it's children and families that are living in poverty, so dealing with family poverty. I think a lot of our actions have been about trying to target families, particularly. We are in a fortunate position that we're a Pathfinder project with Scottish Government, so we have very strong allies within the Scottish Government who help us to break down some barriers, who help us to have a more flexible approach to some funding. And some of the funding in recent years has been really helpful. So the Whole Family Wellbeing Fund, for example, has made a real difference. I've been about local government for quite a long time, and we've been talking about early intervention for a very long time. It kind of feels as if the Whole Family Wellbeing Fund is the first proper opportunity for early intervention. And working very closely with our colleagues in the kind of employability side, again, the No One Left Behind funding, we've been supported by the Scottish Government about supporting that flexible use of those kind of resources to target families and to target the families in the areas that we know are most likely to have people in child poverty. So families with lots of children, with young children, families with or a family where one of the members of the family have a disability, all of the kind of driver areas. So they're areas we try to target. But being able to tie it down to specific instances is probably more difficult because there's so many factors that influence it.
Thanks, Liz. I know Peter Kelly wants to come in, but Peter, just before you come in and answer that question, I'll be sneaky. There's one final question we have to ask. I'll ask that at the same time, and then we can move on to the next line of questioning, and I'll give witnesses a chance to respond to that. So, any reflections on Ms Smith's comments would be good, Peter, but I've got a question that talks about the consequences of not implementing the Act at a local level. I don't really like the word consequences, but I suppose what I would ask is whether there's a belief that this Act has been implemented right across Scotland at a local level, and if there's evidence that it's not, what should happen next? I think that's maybe a better way of kind of phrasing that. But I know, Peter, you want to come in the original question as well.
Yeah, if I may just respond to Liz Smith's question, because I think it's a really fundamental question about our approach to tackling child poverty. There's an old saying, and probably a data person would tell me it's wrong, that there are no poor children in rich families. So we tackle child poverty by tackling family poverty, and we do that through a variety of interventions, as Martin has said. We can't, we can't just focus on those efforts that are directed solely at children. We think about the employability piece with respect to parents. We think about the efforts to increase the number of jobs paying at least the real living wage. These are all part of the general piece to tackle child poverty. So it is difficult to tease that out, and that's why the efforts that have been made by some local authorities and health boards to integrate their child poverty action reports into wider reports can be sometimes really quite helpful, I think. On the question of consequences for not producing reports, because that's really the main responsibility, I think, or not implementing the Act. I mean, I think local authorities and health boards across Scotland have very actively engaged in this process, and I think we need to be really clear about that. I think there's clearly variation in the approach that's been taken across the country, and that's almost expected within the way that the Act has been framed, within the way that the guidance has developed and changed over the years since the Act has been passed. We will expect a degree of local variation in the way that local authorities and health boards report on what it is they're doing to tackle child poverty. There's been very few instances where there's just been complete lack of engagement or non-reporting. But I think where that does happen, I think we need to understand what's behind that, because really one of the challenges, I think, with this process is it is very much it has very often been an internal reporting mechanism. So it's a report that goes to councillors or to senior officials within health boards. It's signed off, and that's the end of the matter. And I think where we've seen some local authorities being more creative is to use the local child poverty action report as an effort to galvanise and build action around child poverty and to be more public about it. So I think where local authorities or health boards are not meeting that responsibility to report, then that needs to, at the very least, be investigated. I don't know whether that needs to go to this committee in Parliament for questions to be asked of those local authorities, but it needs to be investigated. Certainly the Improvement Service provide a good deal of support, and I think really tried to do that in a very positive and encouraging way. We recognise, the national partners recognise the challenges that the public sector experiences, and we talked about them in that opening question in terms of resources. But I think we need to better understand if there's a failure to comply then with what are really quite standard requests, I think. Then we need to understand why, and ultimately I think it's for the Parliament and for this committee to ask those questions if authorities are unable to deliver on their commitments to produce a report.
think that's very helpful. Peter Kelly, I'm conscious we've been talking about reporting. It's about delivery and outcomes as much as it is about reporting. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass back to Liz Smith. I was getting another question.
I'm finished, convener. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Did you not want to ask about collaboration, Liz?
I can do, yes. I mean, I think 2 or 3 of you, in response to the original questions, have been flagging up that when it comes to the use of data, it's very important that local authorities are able to learn from each other. And I just wondered if you feel that there is sufficient collaboration on addressing the issues across local authorities, particularly, and come back to Mr Beswick again from Argyll and Bute, where it's not quite so easy for you, I'm sure, to be able to collaborate on the same basis that some in inner cities might be able to. Do you feel collaboration is good enough?
Thanks for the question, Mr Smith. I would suggest that the greatest strength of this act and the kind of response it's prompted from us has been the collaboration locally, probably rather than between local authorities, and the use of this act as a focus to bring together partners across health, social care, and also the third sector to drive some of this action, and also collate experiences around what's worked well, how the data has driven action, as we've previously discussed. So yeah, that local sharing has been more important, and probably it's in linking to the previous questions, that work has been more important than the reporting function, albeit the reporting is useful in sharing that experience and providing that focus up through the organisation.
Would anybody else like to comment on how easy it is to get the various stakeholders to collaborate with you within the local authority area that you run? I mean, how easy is it to get health boards and various stakeholders on the same page as yourselves? Mr Booth, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, certainly. No, I think that's been a real positive of this. So we have a local child poverty sort of working group that I chair. The Health and Social Care Partnership sends a very senior person to that. Education's heavily involved. All of the council departments are heavily involved. A number of external agencies, so for example, Clyde Gateway and Jobs and Business Glasgow are both heavily involved. In fact, they're both leading on some of our pilot area works rather than the council leading on it. So locally it's been very, very positive, and it does feel as if everybody's pushing in the same direction. As I said earlier with the data, it's a mixed message from some of the national bodies and about the amount of data sharing we can get, but certainly locally it's been very, very positive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Evan and Sally, I know you had both indicated you wanted to come in. The evidence so far is that the 2017 Act and the efforts of local authorities and health boards is actually fostering better collaboration. If you've got something that contradicts that or shows there's other challenges, it'd be good to get that on the record. If not, we'll move on to the next line of questioning. I don't think Sally wants to. Can I say there's been any issues there? Evan, can I just check with yourself? No, contrary view. That's very helpful. Thanks for your for going of an additional answer there. Jeremy, pass to yourself.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning again to the panel. Just following on a wee bit from what my colleague was asking, to what extent has the Act resulted in additional interventions at a local level to tackle child poverty that perhaps weren't happening before the Act? So, what's changed as a result of this? Maybe start with Peter, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, if that's okay.
Thanks very much. I think we have seen again across the country a variety of efforts to try and develop to initiate new approaches to tackling child poverty. Some of that has been driven by the dedicated resources that have been made available from Scottish Government, so new funding streams coming on, and local authorities taking advantage of that. I think Martin already mentioned the whole family wellbeing. That's obviously from Scottish Government. But I think the importance of those initiatives, the Pathfinder, so the Dundee one that I'm a bit more familiar with, have been really important in stimulating new approaches. And they are collaborations, I would see them anyway, as collaborations between Scottish Government and local authorities and other partners at local level. So in Dundee, I think, we see the Pathfinder doing some things, initiating some approaches that wouldn't have been there before. It's given local stakeholders the opportunity to act in different ways. So I think that's evidence of how the Act is trying to how it's facilitating that opportunity for new approaches. And I think there is also a balance between innovation and newness. And I think, again, Martin has really highlighted some of the really excellent work that's going on in Glasgow and some of the things that we know work and that need to be scaled up. So, the income maximisation work, which is kind of almost the bread and butter of anti-poverty work at local level, that still needs to happen. That needs to be delivered at greater scale and greater pace. Again, Martin has mentioned the uptake of Scottish Child Payment in Glasgow. So there is more work to be done on some of those areas. So there's a balance between that need for innovation and new approaches and some of the tried and tested that need to go further.
I don't know if anyone else, I can't choose.
No one else is indicated at the moment, Jeremy.
Oh, I think Martin's just indicated maybe with a wee wave.
Oh, as Sally definitely has, but Sally's been a good witness. You put your request in the box. We'll take you first, Sally.
Thank you for that. I think for us, where things are different, it's around that collaboration and collaboration with our partners in NHS. I think the Act brought us together to work together, and therefore through that we have identified a number of specific areas to look at, where we can jointly target our services, where we can jointly tweak things to do that a little bit more, particularly in areas around things like support for third trimester pregnancy, infant feeding, where we're making sure between us and the NHS that we have a pathway, that there is support available there to make sure that families, and particularly families with young children, have got access to what they need in order to feed the kids. So, I think for us, the benefits and the new bits are those successful collaborations, that successful targeting of services, making sure that people are getting what they need, so that our health visitors, our midwives are raising income maximisation services. They're doing direct referrals. They're bringing those services in and making sure that we are really making sure families get what they're entitled to. So I just wanted to highlight those additional benefits and collaborations and interventions that have come from that. We've done some really successful stuff recently around infant feeding, around third trimester pregnancy, and around a focus on our early years, where we've brought services to parents at a particular establishment, again arising through that joint work, that collaboration with the NHS and the third sector. Thank you.
Right, and Martin Booth.
Thank you. Building on the comments that Sally's just made, a lot of the real challenges are building a trusting relationship with people that need support. So it's how you deliver those services. So it's making sure that you remove kind of barriers to entry, or threshold anxiety, some people call it. So we've got a project where we put financial inclusion support officers into schools, because schools are not seen as a threatening place for some families. Likewise with GP practices, where we provide financial advisors within GP practices in some of our most deprived communities. And likewise, building on the one of the initiatives through our Health and Social Care Partnership was grants that previously would have been given out by a social worker. There's a stigma attached to a social worker being involved with a family. So instead of it having to be a social worker, we now allow our health visitors to give some support grants out, where there's far less stigma, and actually it's a much faster process to get families the support that they need in an emergency situation. So it's about reducing those barriers to entries and working together to make a real difference and make it easy for families to access support. Thanks.
Jeremy, before you come back in, Evan and Peter have both indicated they wish to comment as well. Sorry about that, Jeremy. Evan.
Thank you, Chair. The question is a really important one, and that's about the tangible benefits from this. And just to add a few specifics from an Argyll and Bute perspective, there's been changes in the way we approach our consultation and engagement with children, and the link within the Act to kind of specific other policy frameworks such as UNCRC is a really important part of this. So some of the co-production work we've done specifically with children has been a change to what's happened on the ground that has really informed and helped our approach locally. Secondly, I want to mention the work of the welfare rights team within Argyll and Bute in 2023 to 24. There's been about £4.5 million worth of client gain that have been supported by that team. And if we're talking about reducing poverty, this is real money in people's pockets that wouldn't have happened without the work of that team. So that's a real tangible benefit. And finally, I just want to mention that the work done through the Act and sort of the focus that's provided has helped us working with partners sort of communicate the importance of a specifically rural approach to poverty, and the funding that's been delivered through the Islands Cost Crisis Emergency Fund, that was about 1 million in the past year, has been really valuable for us in helping tackle rural poverty. So just some specifics there.
Okay, Peter.
Thank you. Just a very quick comment to follow Evan's. It is about process innovation as well, and I think Evan's talked about the co-production side. I think we've seen a real movement in terms of how that's done at local authority and health board level that we wouldn't have seen without the Act. So the process that Edinburgh has with End Poverty Edinburgh group of citizens influencing the development of the plan, the work that's going on in Dundee, Aberdeenshire doing some really innovative work around engagement, similarly in Dumfries and Galloway, there's lots of examples, and that has undoubtedly been driven by the Child Poverty Act in question.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. I mean, just going back to the project that you've been talking about, Peter, and what we heard about in Argyll and Bute. I mean, I suppose what I'm interested to know is, can we point to evidence that this is actually making a real difference in real families? So, you know, I've heard lots of buzzwords, I've heard lots of, we'll try and this is new, but what evidence has been taken, or what data do we have to say this is actually making a real difference to the people in Glasgow or Argyll and Bute or Falkirk or wherever? I mean, do we have that evidence, and is that being collected by the local authorities as we go along?
So I'll give a quick answer, because I think my colleagues are well placed to say what's happening in their own local authorities. But what we see across the local child poverty action reports is evidence of where the activities that are highlighted in those reports are making a difference, where the additional gain that's coming from, again, Evan just mentioned welfare rights, the additional gain that's coming through that work, and that work being given greater prominence, greater focus as a result of the prioritisation through the existence of the Child Poverty Act and the requirements on local stakeholders to produce those reports. So I think I can't go through line by line those action reports, but they are full of evidence that says this is where it's working. You know, we know that some of the big drivers have not been in our favour over the last few years, and that that puts a constraint on what can practically be done at a local level. But what we see over and over again is where local authorities are in very difficult circumstances trying to prioritise efforts to address poverty. Arguably, they could do more. They could have better prioritisation processes. But I think that effort is absolutely ongoing and genuine.
Okay, just to inform you, Jeremy, we've got Sally and Martin both wanting to come in, so when we take Sally first. Okay.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
I'm conscious of the time, so I'll be brief, but just in terms of a little bit of impact, even over the last quarter, that has directly arisen from collaboration between us, Falkirk Council and NHS Forth Valley, through our Parental Employment Support Fund and working with NHS Forth Valley, over the last quarter, or actually, sorry, apologies, over the last 6 months, we have supported 78 people to get a welfare benefits gain of 233 or over £233,000. 19 people have been assisted with debt, resulting in support with managing over £133,000 worth of debt. And work placements within the NHS have been set up, 6-month paid work placements for 21 people, and a separate work academy has led to 4 people being offered jobs. So that's collaborative work between employability within the council and NHS Forth Valley that I don't think would have happened unless we'd had this collaboration and focus around child poverty, and that's families moving into employment that can really make a difference to them.
Martin Booth.
Thanks, Chair. And yeah, I think the numbers of children in poverty in Glasgow have, from our starting point in 2020 on the data, have reduced, but it's fairly marginal. But that's because the other pressures in the system. We did the data because we were concerned that all of the indicators were saying that the levels of child poverty in Glasgow would significantly increase. And while things like the Scottish Child Payment have undoubtedly made a difference, a lot of our interventions have made a difference, but the rollout of universal credit has been a backward step with regard to the levels of poverty. So despite of all of these things and the cost of living crisis, we've still managed to make a progress. So actually the numbers without the interventions, I think, would have been significantly worse than they are just now. So a lot of it has been stopping making it worse. And that at the moment feels like a big success. But again, with a more stable position, hopefully we can start to really make inroads. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Paul O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Convener. And I suppose following on from many of those themes with the panel, really I think trying to drill down beyond just the data that's been collected and look at targets, because the Act contained a number of national targets, and I suppose we're keen to understand what relevance those have in local areas. We've obviously heard some of that already, but I think keen to also get an assessment how local authorities feel they can contribute to those national targets and whether we're on track in the view of the panel to meet some of those targets. So I wonder if we can start with just Martin Booth, because I was interested in, Martin, what you were saying about the data that Glasgow collects, and I wondered what reflections you might have on the targets within that.
The whole of Scotland is not in the same starting position, I think it's fair to say. Glasgow's levels of poverty are significantly above the average. So I think having a national target helps to focus minds that actually we're all trying to achieve the same thing. We're all trying to reduce child poverty. I think, and again, I said when I was given responsibility, one of my concerns was that I had a team that were working on this that were, so committed to making a difference. And part of the issue was that, and the data might show that things were getting worse despite their efforts. So it was about that motivating, it was about understanding. So I think our motivation at the moment is not so much about meeting those national targets, it's about reducing the depth of poverty for those that are in poverty, and about trying to stop families falling into poverty because of the impacts that have on a whole number of service areas. So yeah, it's really challenging. It doesn't feel as if we are making a massive contribution to those national targets, but I think having those national targets is important because it focuses the minds.
Okay, I wonder if anyone else would like to comment.
I know Evan's indicated, Paul.
Evan, yeah.
Thank you. There's a bit of a through line here, isn't there? Through questions around kind of how easy it's been to bring partners to the table and kind of action around local authorities that potentially haven't engaged in the same way. I would say that locally the teams are driven to respond to this act because there's strong strategic alignment with what they're seeing every day in terms of the impact on children and families, and also with what we're trying to achieve as organisations. As a health and social care partnership, the perspective I'm coming from, we're trying to move to a more proactive, preventative model, recognising all of those social determinants of poor health and poor life circumstances. So this is very much pushing at an open door, and it has been very easy to bring partners to the table. And I, as Chief Officer, chair the Child Poverty Action Group, and the Act and the national focus that's given has been supportive of that kind of organisational or multi-organisational approach. Having the national targets has been important. I would suggest that's probably been more important nationally in maintaining a focus through potentially kind of diversionary circumstances such as the COVID-19 pandemic. We've kept that focus, and also in supporting a response to kind of requests for funding, and funding makes a difference. And I mentioned the rural funding that had been received and was supporting around rural fuel poverty. I would say that locally the target isn't driving the action; it's the benefit we see that can come out of tackling child poverty and the way that strategic aligns to what we're trying to achieve locally.
Okay. I wonder, can I maybe just ask Peter, just for a view maybe in terms of the interplay between national targets and sort of local context? Because I think, as I referenced in my opening question, I think there are concerns about missing the interim target and then missing the longer term target. So it might just be helpful to have that national, Poverty Alliance have a national role within that, just a bit of a reflection.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I was just about to come in. I think, picking up what Martin said overall about targets, about them focusing the mind and focusing efforts, and I think we've seen that right across the country, where despite, again, Martin's point about not everyone starting at the same place, Dundee has set some very ambitious targets for it in its report around reducing child poverty. It's not starting from the same place as some of the like East Renfrewshire, for example, would not start in the same place. So I think how those targets play out in specific local authorities and how they can be a motivating factor, or perhaps sometimes a demotivating factor, if the task seems so great. I think they are still important, though. The question of whether we're on track is a different one. I think we're, according to the Poverty and Inequality Commission, we're not on track to meet our 2030 targets, and that's really concerning. And I think the responsibility for that is a shared responsibility, obviously, but I think there is more that Scottish Government can be doing to make sure that we are more focused going into the next Child Poverty Delivery Plan on reaching those targets. So there is more that we'll have to do, both through the reducing costs, increasing incomes through social security and through work. I think the thing about the targets, when we've been through some horrendous times over the last 4 years, with both COVID and the cost of living crisis, but these targets are set not just for when the economy is working well and when everything's going well. They are there to focus minds when things are difficult as well, and to redouble efforts when things are difficult. So we are very supportive of the existence of the targets and the need for targets in any anti-poverty strategy, whether at national or local level.
Thanks, Kavina. I think that's helpful.
Thank you. Could I maybe just ask a brief supplementary to Martin Booth? I found it really interesting what you were saying, Martin, about a really committed team who are getting successes on the ground, but then the data goes in the other direction because you're blown off course by factors elsewhere. Now, before I ask the question this week, can I be clear? The Scottish Government clearly has to do more. Because I want to ask about a UK government thing, so there's a shared responsibility, and I put on record the Scottish Government absolutely has to do more as well. One project that Glasgow does is the private rented sector hub, which is reported that 1,400 families from 2019 to June 2023 have been supported to deal with the issues in relation to the benefit cap to sustain tenancies and move into sustainable housing options. But factors happen such as the freezing of the local housing allowance and other benefits issues, and that can impact in the success on the ground in relation to that. How do you report on that? I mean, Glasgow doesn't want to make excuses. I know it doesn't, but it will want to quantify how much more you could have done had all things been equal, vis-a-vis being blown off course because of either Scottish policy decisions or UK policy decisions. So how do you factor that into the work of Glasgow City Council?
Thanks so much for that question. I don't think that we do specifically. I think it's something that we're very aware of in the background. So I think we are far more focused on just trying to make things better than why they've occurred. On the housing issue, one of the big within our Glasgow Helps team, we've got housing specialists from some of our RSL partners who actually sit within the team, so that we're building that knowledge, so that we're actually dealing with issues where they come, and we try to have that no wrong door approach, so that if somebody comes in, we're not passing them to another provider to deal with it. We try to deal with everything in the one place. But I couldn't easily answer your question as to how we quantify the impact of any negative factors. Apologies.
Martin, no, thank you. I suppose I was asking it as a way of, as a Glasgowian, just showing appreciation for what that does happen on the ground, and I'm conscious of that. Sally, I apologise that I'm not going to be able to take you in because I've broken my own rule, and that is I've asked an additional question we didn't have to ask, and I've been told we've got until 10:10 to dispose of these questions. Bad chair. Marie, can I take you in now?
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, panel. Obviously, it's quite clear from this morning's discussion that the Act has led to improvements in the availability of local data on child poverty. I just wanted to give folks the opportunity to make additional comments on that if you want to, and I'll pop it out to Peter first.
On the improvements in data?
Yep.
I think, it's really just to reflect the comments that we rehearsed earlier on. I think there have been clearly greater efforts to use local data. I think in addition to some of the examples that Martin gave, we've seen a range of local authorities do their own survey data, whether of individuals to assess experiences of poverty and so on. So I think looking at data in its broadest sense, not just the quantitative but also the qualitative data that tells us how the experience of poverty is changing. I think we've seen great efforts from local partners across the piece to try and use that more creatively and to feed that into an understanding of what's changing and what needs to change. So we've seen efforts in West Lothian, West Dunbartonshire to understand what's the experiential part of poverty and how does that integrate into the development of strategy. And that's an important part of the data picture, rather than just the harder, more quantitative stuff too.
Thank you. Anyone else before we move on?
I'm not seeing anyone. Do you want to give me a wave? I can see the screens just now. Anyone want to come in?
Okay.
It's over to you, Marie.
Thank you. Mr. Booth, obviously, you kind of gave examples of, how you change local policies in response to insights from the local data on child poverty. I was really interested in those, and obviously, Glasgow's report obviously says, you're making progress to ensure that data does inform policy. I was just wondering if you could maybe make any additional comments on examples arising from this. And also I wanted to know how you're sharing this data inside and outside of the council with your other kind of key partners.
Yep, I'll take the second bit first. As I said, we have a child poverty action group that all of our kind of partner agencies are involved with. We actually publish the data. So the Child Poverty in Glasgow 2024 data was published. We take that to committee as well to make sure it's shared across the council. Kind of actions of where data can make a difference. So one of my biggest frustrations is, so for example, for children that are entitled to school clothing, footwear and clothing grant, that data is driven by data that we hold, because it's driven by council tax housing benefit type data. So we can automate the payments of that. So about 95% of children that are entitled, we just automatically pay them that. They don't have to apply. And it's only ones that kind of fall through that have to apply. We can't do that with other education-based benefits, because the criteria for free school meals and the criteria for educational maintenance allowance are different from the criteria for school clothing grant. Now, to me, if you need a school clothing grant, you kind of need free school meals as well, and you kind of need, if you're of the appropriate age, an educational maintenance allowance. So if we could simplify the system, if we could simplify the structure, we could make that a lot easier, and we would have a much better take-up rate if we had control of that, because we could force those payments out. So that's the kind of things where we could make, I think, an even bigger difference. I'd mentioned earlier about, we think that the take-up of Scottish Child payments, we think it's about 25% underclaimed. That would make a massive difference to families in Glasgow if we could get that up to 100% claimant rate. But we need the data to be able to do that. So yeah, there is things that could be done that would make a difference, and the plea would be to encourage other agencies to share that data and to simplify that data and to get things standardised.
Thank you. Convener, just back to yourself now, just in the interest of time.
Okay, thanks. Before I pass to Paul O'Kane, it's not a question, it's just to say that Martin Booth, I'm quite alarmed to hear about the uptake of the Scottish Child payment in Glasgow. You might have a Glasgow MSP reaching out to you very soon. Sally Buchanan wanted to come in just before I bring you in, Paul.
Thank you. Just on exactly that around Scottish Social Security and the uptake of child payments, I think there's an opportunity there at a national level if we could look at getting some type of a data sharing agreement. You know, there is no need for us to do that 32 times. And actually, if we worked together on that, had a data sharing agreement, I think we could do much better targeting and improve that uptake rate.
Sally Buchanan, can I thank you for saving his time as well, because Paul O'Kane immediately nodded his head, because that was going to be the substance of his follow-up question. So thank you for that. I think we've got a clear understanding there. Gordon MacDonald.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning, panel. I've got one quick question, but I'm a bit alarmed with some of the information I've heard this morning. Martin mentioned the 25% underclaiming. He also mentioned that we need to simplify the system so that school clothing and school meals could be claimed at the same time. Sally, you came up with data sharing agreement, and Peter Kelly said about income maximisation needs to be rolled out at a greater pace. So in order to tackle these and other issues, what further support is required from the Improvement Service and the National Partners Group so that the local partners can be more effective in tackling child poverty? And Martin, since I mentioned you first, do you want to come in on that?
Well, the things that I don't think are in the Improvement Service's gift to give. The Improvement Service is a valuable support across local government. But, for example, you know, that's about. So Sally had raised about having a data sharing agreement with the Scottish Social Security Agency, that they shared that data with us. We're only going to use that data for good. We're going to use it to make sure that you know, families claim the Scottish Child payment. So, you know, that's something that I'm not sure what lever makes that happen. I don't think it's the improvement service. I think it's within government that they need to do that. Likewise with the criteria for the education-based benefits. That's within legislation as to what the criteria are for those benefits. Why aren't they all the same?
Yeah. So I noticed there was a comment from the Child Poverty Action Group that there had to be more detailed guidance on the expected role of local partners, and there needed to be a measure on how success could be measured at a local level. Is that things that would be within the Gift Improvement Service National Partners Group?
Again, I think that's maybe about the standardisation question. I think we've got really good buy-in from all of our local partners. This is not about trying to coalesce the willing. Everybody is willing. Everybody understands that this is probably the biggest single challenge for our society. So all of the partners, whether that's RSLs, third sector, other agencies, everybody's prepared to work together on this, and everybody is working together on this. So that coordination, I think, is really good. There's different problems in different areas, which is maybe where it's difficult to do that national comparisons. But yeah.
Okay, Peter.
So, two parts to the question, I think. The support that Improvement Service and the national partners can provide. So that the Improvement Service is given dedicated funding to deliver the Child Poverty Coordinator role, and to provide that support to local authorities. I think, you know, we've talked about resources for local authorities and health boards to produce the reports. The resource that's available for that national support is limited. There's Poverty and Inequality Research Unit at Glasgow Caledonian University also provides a bit of support. And I think where that support is taken, where it's taken up by local authorities, then it's well received. I've been involved in what we call the self-assessment processes, and there's one ongoing in Western Bartonshire just now, where colleagues from the national partners are providing support where we can, that local authorities and health boards identify themselves what kind of external input and support they might need. But really, it's relatively limited. I think on the point about guidance, I think we've been through various iterations of the guidance to local partners on how their local child poverty action reports should be produced. That I'm sure will go through further iterations to try and make it as clear as possible, but also to try and reflect the diversity of approaches that the Act is trying to encourage and that are probably necessary. You know, the needs that Evan has described are very different from those that Martin has described, so it needs to be flexible, but I think we do need to be clear on how are we measuring, how are we using data, how are we involving people with lived experience. We can certainly provide guidance on how all of these things can be improved.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. And that completes our evidence session. Before 10:10, the clerks will be happy that we almost got back on time. Can I thank all our witnesses for joining us this morning? I thought that was a really useful, we felt like a discussion rather than an evidence session. So thank you very much for your efforts in helping us do our post-legislative scrutiny. Very much appreciated. Next week we'll hear further panels of organisations that have campaigned for the Act and some oversight bodies to get their views. So thank you again, and we'll now just briefly suspend the meeting until they set up for the next business item. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Our next item of business this morning is agenda item 4, the consideration of an affirmative statutory instrument, that being the Disability Assistance Scottish Adult Disability Living Allowance Regulations 2025. The instrument is laid under the affirmative procedure, which means the Parliament must approve it before it comes into force. Before we move to the formal part of this agenda item, can I bring in Mr Balfour?
Thank you, Deputy. Can I just remind members of my register of interest that I am in receipt of PIP, but I'm pleased to say I'm hoping to transfer in January onto the new Scottish Adult Payment, so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
I think Mr Balfour's hoping that will be a seamless transfer. I welcome to the meeting Shelley Summerhold, Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice. I also welcome your team of officials, Beth Tanner, Senior Policy Officer, Carer Benefits and Case Transfer Policy Unit, David Hilber, Team Leader, Case Transfer Policy, and Thomas Nichol, Lawyer, Scottish Government. You're all very welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. Following this evidence session, the committee will be invited in the upcoming agenda item to consider a motion to approve the instrument. I remind everyone that the Scottish Government officials can speak under this agenda item but not in the debate that follows, and I now invite the Cabinet Secretary to make a short opening statement.
Thank you and good morning, Convener, and can I look forward to Mr Balfour's direct feedback on the case transfer process as that progresses. I'm pleased to be speaking with you today about the Disability Assistance Scottish Adult Disability Living Allowance Regulations 2025. These regulations and the associated consequential amendments will introduce Scottish Adult Disability Living Allowance from March 2025 and provide a like-for-like case transfer for all remaining adults in Scotland in receipt of DLA. This is a final important milestone in the Scottish Government's ambitious 5-year project to safely and securely transfer people's disability and carer benefits from the Department of Work and Pensions to Social Security Scotland. Like DLA for adults in the rest of the UK, Scottish Adult DLA will not be open to new applications. Adult disability payment will remain the main disability assistance for adults in Scotland. Instead, Scottish Adult DLA maintains the commitment made that adults who were over 65 in 2013 when PIP was introduced can continue to receive DLA for as long as they are eligible to do so. These regulations extend that commitment to all adults still on DLA, regardless of their age. This approach is a marked difference to the DWP, who require anyone who is under 65 in 2013 to make an application for personal independence payment if they have a change in condition or are due an award review. We have repeatedly heard how this process caused significant stress and anxiety for those who went through face-to-face PIP assessments and have taken the opportunity to remove this concern from people. As our priority is the safe and secure transition of awards, the eligibility rules for Scottish Adult DLA are broadly similar to those for DLA. However, we have made a number of improvements, as we have done for other forms of disability assistance in Scotland, such as our more generous special rules for terminal illness, providing short-term assistance and ensuring equal consideration is given to all sources of supporting information. Once people's awards have safely moved to Scottish Adult DLA, anyone in the younger group, those that were under 65 in 2013, can apply for adult disability payment if they wish to do so. We will provide individuals with clear information to help inform their choice about whether they wish to apply for ADP or remain on Scottish Adult DLA. We have engaged extensively with disabled people and our key stakeholders in developing proposals for the transfer of all remaining DLA awards for adults in Scotland, and I am immensely grateful to everyone who has participated in this process for Scottish Adult DLA, including the members of the former Disability and Carer Benefits Expert Advisory Group, who have been so generous with their time, and the members of the Scottish Commission on Social Security, who provided a number of thoughtful and constructive recommendations on draft regulations. I have accepted almost all of those recommendations from both groups and issued my response to the Commission's report when the regulations were laid. And I welcome this opportunity to assist the committee with further consideration of the regulations today.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. We've got a few questions this morning. Paul O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to Cabinet Secretary and to officials. I suppose just broadening out from perhaps where we started the conversation, just what is government doing to ensure that all those who are transferring are going to be properly supported, I suppose, and communicated with. And I suppose in addition to that, we know that in the past where we've had a case transfer, there have been issues in terms of processing times, and we've debated that and discussed that, and I appreciate that can be challenging, but I think just keen to know what preparation Cabinet Secretary is making for some of those known challenges.
So we have very much designed the case transfer process to be a safe and secure one, and that importance of ensuring that people receive the right payments at the right time is the absolute top priority, with no break in entitlement. And as with other case transfers, people will not need to do anything, and that process will happen automatically. Letters people will receive as part of the case transfer process will clearly explain why the DLA ward has been selected for case transfer, what they can expect and who they can contact for further information. And we will communicate with individuals in the stakeholder organisations through the usual range of channels to ensure that they are aware of what is going on, should they require to support anyone going through the case transfer process. We recently met with the Ill Health and Disability Benefit Stakeholder Reference Group to discuss the approach to communications, where members were supportive of our planned approach to provide tailored information that's specific to individual circumstances. Now, I appreciate what Paul O'Kane has said about some of the timings from the very earliest areas of case transfer. That has improved markedly, and I'd also like to thank the DWP for their work in speeding up the cases from DWP to Social Security Scotland. I would say that the feedback from people that have been through the case transfer process has been positive, and the client survey conducted from October and November 2023 showed a significant majority of people felt informed and reassured about the process. 80% of people said the communication they received was clear and easy to understand. And from 24-25, of course, the Scottish Government has also allocated £12 million to support, for example, third sector organisations for assistance and support. And I hope that gives the committee the reassurance that we are learning from the improvements we do need to make as the case transfer process, and supporting others who can give independent advice through that process too.
Thank you, Camilla.
Okay, Colette Stevenson.
And good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Paul O'Kane kind of stole my thunder a wee bit there, because I was a bit concerned as well about the case transfer, given that there's been concerns before. So I suppose just to sort of get a level of somewhat comfort in terms of what awareness is going forward. I mean, it states in the papers that there's obviously about approximately 66,000 people transferring over. Just what awareness is going forward, and you know, that just given that level of comfort to know that it's seamless in that respect.
So I'm happy to provide further detail in writing to the committee about the success of the case transfer process. I was speaking about this to DWP and Scotland Office colleagues just this week, I think, about how the case transfer process has went exceptionally well, I think, from the point of view of both governments. We do appreciate there were lessons to learn about speeding up that process at the beginning, but it is going exceptionally smoothly and well and to time, and I'm happy to provide that reassurance to committee on that, but particularly on what will be happening with the individuals involved coming over to Scottish Adult DLA. Clearly we're making sure that, as well as the information I gave in my original, my first answer to Paul O'Kane, we're clearly keen to make sure that Social Security Scotland is staffed and those staff are trained specifically on Scottish Adult DLA. Some of those will be new staff, but of course also taking over the very experienced staff who have dealt with the case transfer process in adult DLA, in adult disability payment, to gain from their experience that they've already massed on the case transfer process.
Okay, thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Colette Stevenson, do you want to add anything?
No, thank you very much. That's fine.
Thank you. Jeremy Balfour.
Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Good morning to your team. And I think first to say, obviously, we welcome this seems to be the final piece in the jigsaw, which is really welcome, and we look forward to having. Just a couple of questions. Picking up on your statement just there, you said that DWP, if there's a change in circumstances, make the claimant then go to PIP. So can I just seek clarification? If someone is on DLA at the moment and the circumstances change, will they be reviewed? So they put the change in circumstances in, will they then be reviewed under the DLA regulations as were, or how will that work in practice?
Yes, happy to hopefully clear that up, and officials can chip in if I miss anything on that. But this is one of the changes that we are keen to make when compared to the DWP. They did require people to change over at a change of circumstances, and we will not. So they will be looked at within the DLA, the Scottish Adult DLA system in itself, and will not be required to change over. They may wish to do so, but that is something for them to do, and we may come on to those discussions later, but there is no requirement for them to do so.
That's all, thank you. And I suppose I'm just wondering, what advice would Social Security Scotland give to somebody in regard to whether it would be helpful for them to swap over to that, or would they be referred to some kind of advisor? Because obviously everyone's circumstance is different, and for some people there has been benefit of swapping from DLA onto PIP. For others it hasn't been. I'm just wondering, if you're phoning in, how would that work in practice?
Well, again, you raise a very important point about advice. The Social Security Scotland will not give advice to anyone. They are not there to do so on this benefit, or indeed anyone else. What they can give is and they will give, is information. So they will give information that there is the option to move over to adult disability payment. But as you say, some people will benefit from that, some people may not. Now, it is not possible to know specifically whether someone would benefit or not, in essence, until that adult disability payment process has been gone through. But it is absolutely not the role of the agency, nor should it be, to suggest to someone whether they would be or would not be better off over this process. But the importance of providing that information, and also signposting to those who could give advice, and I mentioned that in my earlier answers. That's the important part. We provide the information, others provide the advice.
That's helpful. And just one final question. You mentioned that you had picked up most of the points recommended by Scots. I suppose one of the areas where you didn't seem so keen was the Scottish Government has decided against providing any flexibility in the 12-month deadline award to be reinstated. And I just wonder why that flexibility isn't there and why you came to that decision.
Well, this is something we gave careful consideration to, but in essence the decision came down to the fact that I believe that a bright line rule, such as we've suggested, does provide clarity and consistency for both individuals and for the support organisations. So people will be able to request their Scottish Adult Daily Award is reinstated if it has ended in the past year, ensuring parity with the DWP's approach for DLA renewal applications for an interval. But due to our rolling awards and the light touch reviews, we anticipate this process will really be needed for Scottish Adult DLA, whereas the DLA renewal process requires a full new application at the end of a fixed term award. So there are, again, nuanced differences. But we do believe that the provisions here have been drafted to maintain Scottish Adult DLA as a closed benefit, so only available for individuals with an award of DLA when Scottish Adult DLA launches, and that limiting the length of time two awards can be linked to 12 months is appropriate, given the awards must be underpinned by the same condition or conditions. Now, of course, if someone whose award has ended more than 12 months ago has experienced a change in condition, they would be entitled to disability assistance potentially, but they would make that new application through adult DLA, adult disability payment. Too many acronyms this morning. Apologies.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Okay, nothing further. Okay, there being no further questions, I would now invite. Bear with me 1 second. Can I just check? Is it this move to another agenda item, or is this an agenda item? Move to the next agenda item, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I nearly kept us under the same agenda item, Cabinet Secretary. There will be no further question. We'll now move to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 5, which is formal consideration of the motion S6M15260 that the Social Justice and Social Security Committee recommends that the Disability Assistance Scottish Disability Assistance Living Allowance Regulations 2025 be approved, and invite the Cabinet Secretary to speak to and to move the motion.
Move, Convener.
Okay. Do any member wish to contribute to a short debate in relation to this matter? Okay, there being no members wishing to speak, I should technically check whether the Cabinet Secretary wishes to sum up to that lightningly quick debate.
I'll pass.
Perfect. The question, therefore, is that motion S6M15260 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville be approved. Are we all agreed? Yes. Agreed. That's nodding heads I see online just to confirm that. Okay, we are all agreed. The committee will report on the outcome of the instrument in due course. I invite the committee to delegate to our convener, or if required myself, the details and signing off of that report, if that would be agreed with members. Thank you very much. And that concludes that agenda item. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, to you and your officials for your attendance this morning. Before we move to agenda item 6, it's been drawn to my attention. You remember at the start of the meeting we were unclear whether we're taking item 7 or 8 in private. That was due to a numbering error in my brief. It's actually agenda item 7 we are taking in private. So I just wanted to correct that and put that on the record this morning. That said, we do now move to agenda item 6, which is subordinate legislation, a negative SSI on council tax reduction. So the consideration of a statutory instrument is subject to the negative procedure. The Council Tax Reduction Scotland Amendment No. 3 Regulations 2024. The main purpose of this instrument is to update the Council Tax Reduction State Pension Credit Scotland Regulations of 2012 and 2021. Do members have any comments on the instrument? There being no comments on the instrument, I ask if members are content to note the instrument. I thank members for that. The next item we have to consider is the consideration of another Scottish statutory instrument, that being the Disability Assistance Scottish Adult Disability Living Allowance Consequential Amendment, Revocation and Saving Provision Regulations 2024. This instrument is also subject to the negative procedure. Its main purpose is to make consequential amendments, revocation and savings provisions as a result of the introduction of the Scottish Adult Disability Living Allowance. Do members have any comments to make on this particular instrument? Okay, there being no comments to make, can I ask if members are content to simply note the instrument? Okay, thank you very much. And we do now move to agenda item 7, which is in private, when I move into private session. Thank you.